Hello and welcome to Wizards, Warriors, and Words, a fantasy writing advice podcast. Today's episode is going to be the second part of our listener Q&A because we had so many last episode that we couldn't get through all of them. My name is Jed Herne, author of Fires of the Dead, which you can see the cover for behind me if you are watching on YouTube. And I'm joined by my co-hosts, starting with Mike.
Hey, I'm Mike Fletcher, author of The Obsidian Path and City of Sacrifice series and some other stunningly amazing books.
Which
Dirk
I
Ashton?
wrote for Mike.
Which, yeah,
I'm Dirk Ashton, and I write all Mike Fletcher's books, but I also wrote the Paternus trilogy, actually written by Rob Hayes.
Nice.
And here are two of the characters.
Nice.
Peter and Fiona in training.
Nice.
See, now I'm going to have to grab one of these.
So Rob is...
This is Esker.
Oh, heck yeah.
Awesome.
Rob's holding up a little figurine of Esker, which has like two swords and like bat wings coming out of her shoulder blades, which is pretty sick. Cool. So yeah, today's episode, we're going to be continuing with the listener questions. If you haven't listened to our last episode from last week, check that out because we are kind of following on from the questions with that. First question is the second part of Hugo's question that we ended the previous episode with, which is that he plans on writing a trilogy to end the main plot of his story. Is this fine or can this be a problem for editors? What do you guys think?
what do you mean by editors?
Yeah,
Well, this is an
I mean,
interesting
if you're
because-
self-publishing, your editor is going to be like, yes, write a trilogy, write more books, send
Pay
them
me
all to
more
me to
money.
edit and pay me.
Mhm.
So your editor is going to be fine. Now, if you mean publishers instead of editors, if your first book is amazing, they will want to buy all three of them.
Yep.
If your first book is, it's not bad, then they won't buy any of them.
Or if your first book is amazing, but not enough sell for the publisher to want to do the second book, Mike.
Yeah.
Ooh,
uh,
that was burn. Would you like some cream for that, Mike?
No, Mike experienced that.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote a book that is hugely Beyond Redemption, that was hugely critically acclaimed and absolutely loved by the audience that actually read it. And it's quite a good size, but they decided, nah, on the second two. So Mike got stuck. But that doesn't happen all that often. And more likely these days, I think is it more likely in trad publishing these days that they do a trilogy deal as opposed to just a one book deal?
I mean, I don't know. I think there's still space in the market for like standalones, but I think like they're more than happy to have trilogies, you know, because obviously, yeah. If they're releasing it, if you've written a trilogy and you're going to a publisher, then they're going to be like, well, yeah, okay, we like the first book, that's brilliant. As long as it does sell, then yeah, we're definitely going to publish the next two because it's a guaranteed audience basically. People who read book one are pretty much going to move on to book two.
Yep.
I think the great example, like a good modern example of this is probably the Black Iron Legacy series by Gareth Hanrahan, who we've had on the show in the past. The first book, The Gutter Prayer, fantastic standalone. You can read it, never read any of the other books in the series. Doesn't leave you with any major sort of cliffhangers that are unsatisfying, but there is absolutely a world in that opens up by the end of the first book that makes sequels really interesting to explore. And as a result, he's written, what's the second book? It's behind me somewhere. Shadow Saint, which I loved, probably one of my favorite books that I read last year. And then
Broken God.
Yeah, Broken God, the third one, which has come out. And I don't know if there's more, but have to read Broken
There's
God.
five, I think.
Is it going to be five?
I think it's five.
So,
I don't know. The thing is, he planned it as a trilogy, but then
Correct.
the publishers said they wanted more. So I think it's five now.
Yeah, I remember him actually talking. I'm not sure if it was on this show or if it was on the Novel Analyst podcast about how he was conscious of the fact that like any book that he wrote in that series could be the last. So he had to end every book in a way that was satisfying, but also encourage there being sequel potential. So I think that's a kind of good thing to aim for, is to try to make sure that your book one kind of wraps up things in a satisfying way that proves that you can do a good ending, but also leaves the world open to future books for sure.
So basically, do a Star Wars.
Yeah, do a
New
New
Hope
Hope.
could stand as its own.
Yes.
Empire Strikes Back needs Return of the Jedi.
That's right. And the Ewok Holiday Special is also just a wonderful standalone.
Yeah, don't worry too much about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Write the first book. If you're going to query, just tell them about the first book, that it is the book one in a trilogy, and that's it. You know, just don't fret too much about that.
Write the book the way you want to write the book.
Yeah.
And, you know,
at the length that it needs, that you think it needs to be. That's
Yeah.
Prepare yourself for failure.
All right. Well, on that note, moving on to the next question. Laura writes in, first of all, I'm a fan of your podcast. Good start. You guys have good advice and you make me laugh. That's pretty cool here. They just listened to our episode about querying, which is timely for what they're doing now. I'm a self-published author who originally was hooked by a subsidiary publisher. Rob, sounds familiar. I learned a lot, but realized I didn't want that relationship. I split from them and republished my first one and self-published the others. I do like the self-publishing, knowing it's out there, having the creativity, but I have a new series that my beta readers love, and I thought maybe I should query. After listening to your episode, though, especially the part about how long things take, I wonder, is querying even worth it anymore? But she also wonders, did I lose patience by self-publishing, and would agents still consider representing it, pulling it from the shelf and trying to get a publisher to republish it, or does that just never happen? So there's a couple of different things in here. I think probably the first one is querying worth it, because it seems to take a long time. What's our thoughts?
if you want to be it's just basic. It's what you want. Do you want to be traditionally published? If you want to be traditionally published, then absolutely query and take the time to query. You once that stuff is written, don't stop writing though. Keep writing.
That's a key point.
Once you have that first book done, you can go ahead and continue to write the other books or move on to a different series. Don't wait around. But by the time you finish the second or third book, you're going to know if you've got a traditionally published deal or an agent. If you've got an agent, which is what you have to get first, then you'll know. And by that time, you really haven't wasted that much time, and you can self-publish. You can just, put them out one every 3 to 6 months, or
definitely don't stop writing after you. If you write the first book and then stop to write something else, then you end up with a bunch of book ones. And no book twos to go with them. Trust me, don't do that.
And with self-publishing, you've really wasted, the only time you've wasted at that point, and you didn't waste it because now you know, is the time you took to write up the query letters and send them out. And because it never hurts, even though you've put off publishing that first book for maybe a year or two. There is nothing wrong. In fact, it can be very helpful to release faster. Release, like I was saying, release self-publishing, release them. Some people do a book every 2 months. Some people do a book a month.
Rob?
Some people do. He did that once and he said he'll never do it again.
Never doing it again until next year when I release the next 2 War Eternal books.
Nice.
Oh, okay.
It was really commercially lucrative for you though to do it that way.
Yeah.
So,
it was.
Yeah.
Which actually ties into, I think, you got to figure out what your priorities are.
Correct.
If you want to be traditionally published, then yes, it is definitely still worth pursuing, an agent and the route of being traditionally published. If you're after money, then from a real standpoint, kind of no. If other than the sort of like the bigger authors, the sort of like the mid-list indie authors earn more than the mid-list trad authors. They just do. That's why you see all these stories online about, authors who you think are selling a ton of books, and they're sitting there going, I don't earn enough from this to make a living. I still have to work my day job and everything. And then you see a bunch of like, mid-list indie authors who they can make a living from, sort of like selling books because they earn a lot more per book sale, basically.
Yeah.
That made a lot more sense in my head. I tried to get it out.
I agree with what you're
just
saying.
stumbling.
And even if you get a terrific 6-figure deal for a trilogy or something, say you get $100,000, that's considered pretty amazing for a first-time author. But you spread that out over 3 years, you have your agent's cut, your taxes, you can't live on that.
And that's unlikely. I mean, most first-time authors, you're not getting 30 grand a book. You're just some are, but I mean, most aren't. Like I remember,
it's usually closer to five or 10, I think.
Yeah, Beyond Redemption was the advance was 15, and I was like, oh,
that's pretty big for those days.
Yeah. But it's like, that's, there you go. That's your income for the year. Like,
well, 10%, 10 or like minimum 10%, sometimes 20 goes to your agent.
Yeah. 15 is
15.
If your agent asks for more than 15, then get a different agent.
Yeah. Unless they like make millions, in which case.
Yeah.
But no, 15 is the industry standard from what I understand. Yeah. I think, also just some other things into here. I think, would agents still consider republishing it if it's indie?
It does happen
if it's really successful. Like, I think
it does happen. They get picked up. It's happened from the SPFBO.
Mm-hmm.
People pick up the actual existing books that exist. The time when you were once, when I first started, even in 2016, you had to consider that if you indie published, you would never get an agent. No matter what you came up with, you would be basically kind of blacklisted and ignored by the traditional publishing scene, by publishers and agents. And that time is long past. That can happen.
This Blackstone Heart,
but it is rare. It is rare. And it has to have already gotten some pretty significant
publicity and traction and sales.
Yeah.
Mike?
So Blackstone Heart came second in Mark Lawrence's. There, we've mentioned him in this episode. SPFBO number 7. It won the Book Nest Best Self-Published Fantasy of the Year. It is selling really well.
Oh yeah.
And after SPFBO ended, I reached out to 3 different agents that I know, who I'm friends with, writers. They rep, just saying, like, do you think there'd be any interest? I've got a book that has came second here, won that, it's selling well, and all 3 were basically like, no, but please send me whatever you write next.
Right. So again, and if you indie published and you've done kind of well, or even if you really haven't that much, agents will still look at new manuscripts, new projects.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
They won't immediately discount you out of hand because you were an indie publisher, which was not the case 5 years ago.
No.
You would have been ignored. But that's not the case. So don't let that worry you.
Mike, are you planning on sending them future books? You don't have to share if you don't want to.
So what I'm gonna do is, so the Obsidian Path series is kind of like my bread and butter. Once that's done, I'm going to write probably a standalone novel for submitting to traditional publishers just to test those waters again.
Sure.
Once that's out the door, I'm going to finish up the last City of Sacrifice novel so that I've got those 2 trilogies done. But yeah, I'm gonna try it again, kind of just out of curiosity and because I'm a glutton for punishment and really dumb.
Nice. All right, probably moving on to the next question, unless we have anything quickly to add on that one. Yep. So this question is quite long. I can barely fit it on my screen in one go, so I'm going to try to paraphrase it as much as possible. So this question comes from Emily Jane, who says, first of all, I just wanted to say that I'm a huge fan. We've had a lot of huge fans messaging in to us. It's nice. It's much nicer than people messaging in and saying, hey, I think you guys are stupid. Answer this question.
You suck.
I don't mind that either because, they're not wrong.
See, look, we don't need critics when we are our own worst critics. So basically that question is a little complicated. They're writing a steampunk fantasy novel, which, first of all, love that genre. Basically they're saying that their book revolves around 2 different timelines. So they have a steampunk world that is, hang on, how is this described? That is essentially taking place like in the future, and then in the time after, and then there is the second portion of the book taking place several hundred years in the past, in the time before. And the way that they've kind of differentiated those is by writing the present day chapters in third person. So that's the steampunk future, the time after in third person, where all the flashbacks are in first person. So the question is really boiling down to this idea, to try to simplify it, of how do you best deliver a structure of a story taking place in 2 different timelines while avoiding confusion. They don't want to reveal the concept of the flashbacks or the magic in a synopsis. They want the book to be kind of a riddle that is slowly unraveled by the reader as they go through it.
I love the idea.
Yeah, I think it's cool as well. And the only problem is that they worry that readers would go around thinking the book is simply a steampunk setting with elements revolving around heists, bounty hunters, and pirates, only to find out it has a much deeper plot in this past section, which is rooted in more fantasy and magic and more fantastical stuff. So yeah, basically they appreciate any of feedback. Thank you for taking time to read my email. They have some other things in there as well, but I think that's probably the main thing we should get into. So to summarize that question down, and I do appreciate her emailing in with that, because that is like, it's good to have a lot of context for that.
Really good question.
Yeah, the central thing here is like, how do you have a present and past chronology going through your story without kind of just giving it away by saying like past, present at the start of chapters? And then the second part of that also is, how do you tell readers that it's more than just a steampunk story while not telling readers that it's more than just a steampunk
That's
story?
just going to have to come out. I wouldn't worry too much about that. That's a good one.
There's actually a really good example of this out there already. If you haven't seen, this is a bit of a spoiler. It came out a few years ago. Okay, so there's a sci-fi movie out there called Arrival, which is my favorite movie. It's also Adrian Tchaikovsky's favorite movie, which is pretty cool. He mentioned that when we had him on a few months ago. And all I'll say about it is that you think that certain scenes in the story are happening in a specific order, and then you realize they're not happening the way that you think they are.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched that, I would recommend watching Arrival and just seeing how they pulled that off. Yeah, so that's a good example of, if you just leave out a bit of information, readers will assume that your story is proceeding like from beginning to end
on a chronological order, basically.
Correct. So play with expectations. Play with expectations.
Yeah, I don't know how well. I mean, I like the idea of first person and third person shifts. I'm assuming that these are completely different characters. There are questions I would ask this person. Are they the same? Are there some of the same characters in both storylines, or is it completely different set of characters?
They seem like they're different sets of characters
who are maybe some. I would imagine they're somehow related, in some way, obviously.
I mean, I
would just go ahead and just tell it, and write some of it, and give it to some readers, and see how they feel. And if you're not going to do time tags, like the year AD or BC, or whatever you want to make it up, and you're not going to say past or present or a few days ago or 100 years ago or something like that, then just keep going. You set yourself a difficult task, but something that I think that would be fascinating if you can pull it off.
I think people, like readers, will assume, as Jed said, that it's a sort of chronological, it's set in a chronological order. So if you're starting in the steampunk setting, and then your next chapter is moving to this more traditional fantasy setting somewhere in the past, obviously with a different perspective, that's fine. But I think unless that's set in the same kingdom and that you point out the fact that the kingdoms are named the same thing, they will probably assume that it's different kingdoms. Yeah, and one of them's more technologically advanced and one of them is less so. They won't automatically assume that it's the past, I don't think.
Right. Yeah, I think they'll just assume they're at different parts of the same world.
Yeah, so I think you're probably.
And I think, and you might want to keep that in mind, think in that way, right, Rob? Think in terms of setting it up so as if they are different cultures, different parts of the same world, but then we find out later.
Yeah, and then you sprinkle the details in as the story develops to start making the reader question. So, maybe if they are the same kingdom, you leave off mentioning the kingdom name in one of the timelines until maybe halfway through, and then you just sprinkle that in, and suddenly they're like, wait, is it the same kingdom then?
Or the name changes, which happens with countries all the time, right? Like you have a point 3/4 of the way through where they're like, the main character in the present discovers that this country used to be called a different name. And then the reader goes, oh, it's the same place. So yeah, that's, I think, a good way to structure it.
Exactly. So yeah, it's just I think you just assume that the reader, it's hard because obviously you're coming from a place of full knowledge, but you assume that the reader is not going to know what the hell's going on.
Yes.
They're not going to just assume that's what's happening unless somebody has dropped some horrible spoilers. Jed.
Like us.
So yeah, you just,
Rob.
I think what you have to do is just write it. Trust yourself that you know what you're doing for a start, because you're going to know better than us the story, but write it as it sort of comes, and then slowly sprinkle in the details, which will then lead people to question everything they know. And then obviously when the reveal does eventually happen, I'm guessing probably towards the end, you're going to have some people who have figured it out and you're going to have some people who haven't, but either which way, it's going to be satisfying. The people who haven't figured it out are going to be like, what? And the people who have are going to be like, yes, I knew it. So,
yep.
Another way
what do you guys think? So ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Jed.
Oh, I was going to say, another way you could do this as well is the Frankenstein method, where you have the present taking, and by Frankenstein, I mean the actual book by Mary Shelley, like not just as a term. So basically with that, there's like 4 different frames where you have a character describing another character who is reading a letter that is describing another character. And that's a lot of frames in there. But basically what I'm saying is that you could, for instance, and I'm not sure what percentage of the story is present versus past, but if the past was only a small percentage, you could have your present chapters interspersed with maybe like letters from someone written in the past, or, you know, describing things that they're going on. And that could be a way to like distinguish them and get the first person in there in a way that feels natural, rather than just shifting from third person narration to first person narration, which could be a little bit confusing and off-putting to readers. But I think probably for me, the best way to go about this would be just pretend they're different countries and then you merge them. And that's actually really the essence of a twist, is like most twists, if you look at them, when you set up something so that readers think it is 2 somethings, and then you reveal it's the same something all along. Like most really good twists, like Darth Vader and Luke's father are 2 things until you realize they're the same thing. That's sort of the structure of how most twists go. Mike, do you have any thoughts about how you would tackle this, or any tips for this?
Not really. I mean, Dirk mentioned time tags. The only thing I would say is it's stunning how few readers notice them. I wrote a short story that was kind of playing with time ideas and stuff. And the clue, you know, was very obviously each sort of like little section had its own heading, which was like the character's name and the day and time. And it was crucial to understanding the story. No one fucking read them. This is a short story. It wasn't even a novel. This is like a 4,000 word short story. And still no one read the fucking things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah, I made sure I put in 3 days ago, really big. Today. Yeah.
Did you get this, reader?
Sort of like, if you say 3 days ago, they go, oh, okay. But if you just have like Fletcher was saying, like a date at the beginning of one thing, people aren't going to read it because, you know, they don't know what the dates mean, I guess.
Too much effort. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that the change in POV, third and first, is necessary.
Yeah, me neither.
Might be cool though, but
it might be cool.
It works or it doesn't.
Yeah, because you can always switch it.
It's not the first book to have done it as well. There are books which switch between first and third person POVs.
And second person.
Stay away from second.
Unless you're writing interactive fiction like this sucker over here, which is all second person, which means that when I go back to writing novels, I'm going to be really discombobulated for a couple of months.
So hard.
You get used to it. It was weird.
It's like writing in present tense, man. Oh god.
I have enough. I have enough problems with present and past tense. The Paternus novels are in present. The new thing I'm working on is in past tense, And I just keep slipping into present tense. I just keep doing it.
It was the other way around. I wrote one in present tense and I just kept slipping into past tense. It was like,
yeah.
And like I was going through editing and I was just constantly finding these little ones, like the character just refers to it as I did this instead of like I am
doing this. Anyway, I hope that was useful. What was the name of the question again? I've lost it on here. Emily Jane, hope that was useful. Thank you for sending in that question. You also have another question there, which I'm interested to potentially get to in the future. But I think that's probably been enough listener questions for now. Thank you for everyone for emailing in your questions. It's really cool that you guys are basically doing our job for us and giving us topics that we need to talk about. So keep it up. If you have questions that you want to email into the show, send them to wizardswarriorswords@gmail.com. That email address should also be down in the show notes for this episode. Also, if you want to help support the show and get priority Q&A access, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/wizardswarriorswords, also in the show notes for this. And if you're a patron, you can get cool things like free advanced reader copies of our new books. I think up there at the moment we have Pawn's Gambit and Noriaska Groans.
There's a Vengeance coming soon.
Heck yeah. Plug it, Rob. That was a nice little reverb effect there. Plus, you get priority Q&A access, which means that we prioritize your questions when we're putting together these listener Q&A episodes. Also you visited by the ghost of Michael R. Fletcher the first time you donate, and he thanks you and does good things for your life.
Fletcher's dead? What a twist!
Actually a necromancer.
Yes. So on that note, that we have discovered that there are only 3 people actually in this conversation. Thank you so much for listening or watching, and we will all see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
And sweet dreams. Hopefully, Fletcher will only come to visit you in a kind ghost capacity.
I like the way you end that one on a threat.